On January 1st, 2026, hundreds of independent gas stations across California will be forced to close for good. Not because business dried up, not because drivers stopped buying fuel. They are shutting down because they are about to be red-tagged and hit with fines of up to $5,000 per day if they remain open. Right now, 473 gas stations are running on borrowed time, just 17 days left. The owners saw this deadline coming. They didn't ignore it. They tried to follow the rules. They submitted the required paperwork. They applied for financing. They lined up contractors. And still, many of them were left stuck with no way forward. Here's how this situation unfolded. In 2014, California passed a law requiring all underground fuel storage tanks to be upgraded from single-walled to double-walled systems by December 31st, 2025. The reason was safety. Single-walled tanks are more likely to fail. Over time, they corrode, crack, and leak. During earthquakes, these tanks can corrode and split apart. When that happens, gasoline leaks into the ground and contaminates nearby groundwater. On paper, giving stations 11 years to complete the upgrade sounds fair. But rebuilding a gas station is nothing like swapping out a home appliance. Removing the old tanks, installing double-walled replacements, and bringing the entire site up to code typically costs around $2 million per location. For many small, independently owned stations, that price tag is higher than the business itself is worth. To address this, California set up a financial assistance program called RUST, short for Replacing, Removing, and Upgrading Underground Storage Tanks. The program was designed to offer loans and grants that could cover up to 100% of the upgrade costs. Station owners began submitting applications because they had no other option. That funding was the difference between staying open and shutting down. And then the waiting started. Weeks turned into months. Months turned into years. In some cases, it took as long as 2 years just to receive a decision on whether an application was approved or denied. Not 2 years to receive the money. 2 years simply to find out if they even qualified. One station owner in Alama submitted his application in 2023. By November 2025, he still hadn't received an answer. With the deadline arriving, he had no choice but to shut down. He had operated that station for 41 years. It wasn't just a business to him. It was part of the community. He followed every rule. He completed the paperwork exactly as required, but the process moved at its own slow pace while the clock kept ticking. And if this sounds like a problem limited to a few hundred stations, it's much bigger than that. The impact doesn't stop at California's borders. It reaches into Arizona and Nevada as well. These stations aren't scattered randomly across the state. Many of them sit in small towns where they are the only source of fuel for miles in any direction. When fire season hits, these locations keep first responders on the road. They fuel farm equipment. They supply school buses. Medical facilities depend on them. And this brings us to who is really taking the hit. These are not corporate-owned locations. Companies like Shell and Chevron are not losing sleep over a $2 million upgrade. They will cover the cost and pass it straight on to drivers. The stations being forced to close are small, family-run businesses, independent owners who have operated the same location for decades. These are the stations that usually offer the lowest prices in town. They are the ones that keep large chains from pushing prices even higher. Once they are gone, what remains? Branded corporate stations with no real competition. When the local station shuts down, you don't simply drive across the street to another one. The nearest option might be 20 or 30 miles away, and when you finally reach it, the price at the pump is higher because there is no one left to compete with. Drivers pay more because they have no alternative. And this is where the situation turns truly dangerous. This isn't happening on its own. California has already lost the Phillips 66 refinery in Los Angeles. That's 139,000 barrels per day of gasoline production gone. Then in April 2026, Valero's Benicia refinery is scheduled to shut down, taking another 145,000 barrels per day offline. This isn't just a loss of refining capacity. It's also a loss of distribution. Gas stations are a critical part of the supply chain. When hundreds of them shut down, the stations that remain have to absorb more demand. Their storage tanks empty faster. Deliveries become more urgent. Even small disruptions start to create shortages. We've already seen how fragile this system is. In February 2025, a fire shut down the Martinez refinery. That single facility produces about 156,000 barrels per day, roughly 10% of California's total refining capacity. The shutdown lasted 2 months, and gas prices spiked almost immediately across the state. Arizona and Nevada saw prices jump as well, because they rely heavily on fuel refined in California. That was the result of a single refinery going offline unexpectedly. Now consider what happens when 2 major refineries shut down permanently, while hundreds of gas stations disappear at the same time. Arizona gets about 33% of its gasoline from California. Nevada depends on California for roughly 88%. Reno relies on California for virtually all of its fuel. When California's supply tightens, these states feel it immediately. Between these 2 refinery closures, California is set to lose 17% of its refining capacity within just 6 months. That equals about 284,000 barrels per day that will have to be replaced through imports. And all of this is happening while hundreds of gas stations are being forced to close. There is also a national security issue that rarely gets mentioned. California is home to more than 30 military installations, including Air Force bases, Army posts, and naval stations. Every one of them depends on a steady supply of jet fuel, diesel, and gasoline. That fuel comes from California refineries. Military bases in Nevada and Arizona rely on that same supply as well. When refining capacity goes down, military readiness goes down with it. If fuel shipments from countries like India or South Korea are disrupted by a geopolitical crisis, California's military installations could face immediate shortages. One key facility in this system is the Valero Benicia refinery, which supplies a large share of the jet fuel used by military bases in Northern California. When that refinery shuts down in April, the question becomes simple. Where does that jet fuel come from next? Now, add another layer to this problem. Shell has announced plans to close more than 1,000 gas stations nationwide by the end of 2025. As one of the largest fuel retailers operating in California, those closures will have a direct impact on the state. Shell is shifting its investment away from traditional fuel stations and toward electric vehicle charging infrastructure. The company plans to roll out 70,000 electric vehicle charging stations by the end of 2025. On the surface, that sounds like progress. But here's the problem. Electric vehicles still make up only a small share of California's total vehicle fleet. Out of roughly 32 million cars on the road in the state, the vast majority still run on gasoline. Those drivers still need to refuel, yet the system that delivers gasoline is being taken apart before the charging network is ready to fully replace it. You can't plug a 20-year-old Toyota into an EV charger. And for many drivers, buying a new electric vehicle isn't realistic when they're already paying roughly twice what Texans pay at the pump. California uses a specialized gasoline blend known as carbob, and only a small number of refineries around the world are capable of producing it. Regular gasoline from Texas can't simply be shipped west and sold in California. It doesn't meet the state's environmental requirements. That fuel must either be produced at California refineries or imported from specialized facilities in places like South Korea, India, or Singapore. When local refining capacity drops, California has no choice but to bring in more carbob by ocean tanker. That process takes time. Tankers have to cross the Pacific. They have to wait for available port space. They have to unload their cargo. Then the fuel still has to be transported and distributed to gas stations. Any delay at any point in that chain leads to immediate shortages. And this situation is made even worse by the Jones Act. This federal law requires that any ship carrying cargo between U.S. ports must be American-built, American-owned, and American-crewed. Only about 55 petroleum tankers in the entire country meet those standards. As a result, shipping gasoline from Gulf Coast refineries to California by sea is extremely expensive. California operates like a fuel island. There are no pipelines connecting it to refineries in Texas or Louisiana. Fuel has to arrive by tanker. And with refineries shutting down and gas stations closing, that island is shrinking. Now look at the numbers. California currently has roughly 1.62 million barrels per day of refining capacity. The state consumes about 1.72 million barrels per day. That gap already requires imports. Once the Phillips 66 and Valero refineries close, total refining capacity drops to about 1.34 million barrels per day. That means California will need to import about 384,000 barrels of fuel every single day, or roughly 140 million barrels each year. So where does that supply come from? Overseas. Asian exporters. In May 2025 alone, South Korea shipped about 195,000 barrels per day to California. India sent another 39,000 barrels per day. These countries have to produce carbob specifically for California's requirements, then ship it across the Pacific Ocean. Any global disruption, any conflict, or any trade issue can cut that supply instantly. Many of the stations being forced to close are critical infrastructure. They fuel agricultural equipment during harvest season. Ranchers rely on them. Truck drivers depend on them. Emergency services use them. These stations keep first responders moving when disasters strike. Now look at what happens when the only gas station in a rural town shuts down. Families are forced to drive 40 or even 50 miles round trip just to fill up. That's an extra hour added to everyday errands. Parents trying to get children to school. Workers commuting to their jobs. Elderly residents traveling to medical appointments. That added distance quickly becomes a serious burden, and the damage goes beyond access to fuel. These stations employ local workers. They purchase goods from nearby suppliers. They contribute to local tax revenue. When one closes, 4 or 5 jobs disappear from a small town overnight. The convenience store shuts its doors. The mechanic bay goes dark.